My son called me obsolete on my 70th birthday, and in front of everyone, he threw me out of my own company. That moment broke something inside me, but it also awakened a fire they never expected, because the very next day, I destroyed the empire they thought they had stolen from me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I want you to understand how deep this cut went. For 70 years, I had carried myself with dignity. I had built a business from the ground up, starting with nothing but empty pockets and calloused hands. I gave my children everything I never had. I missed family dinners, holidays, even moments with their mother, because I was out there building a future for them. Every brick of that company was laid with my sacrifice. Every late night, every deal, every risk I took. It was all so they would never know the hunger, the fear, the uncertainty I had known in my youth. So on my 70th birthday, I woke up with pride. I thought it would be a day where my children would gather around me, honor me, and remind me that those years of sacrifice meant something. I dressed carefully that morning, buttoning my shirt, adjusting my tie, telling myself that 70 is not an ending. It is a milestone, a celebration of survival and legacy. As I drove toward the office, my heart was light. I imagined my sons and daughters waiting inside, smiling, clapping, maybe even shedding a tear as they told me how much I meant to them. I thought I would walk into a room filled with warmth and gratitude. But what I walked into instead was the coldest betrayal a father could endure. When I entered, the decorations were there, the faces were there, the laughter was there, but something felt wrong. The smiles were too sharp, the applause too hollow. My gut tightened, but my heart wanted to believe. I thought, they had planned a celebration of me, of my life, of my journey. I couldn't have been more wrong. The sound of clapping echoed in the room as I walked in, but it felt hollow, almost rehearsed. I looked around, searching for warmth in my children's eyes, but all I saw was a strange mix of pride and something I couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe, or worse, amusement. For a moment, I pushed the unease aside. This was my birthday, after all. I told myself I was being paranoid. Surely my children hadn't gathered me here for anything but love and celebration. My youngest son stepped forward first, a microphone in his hand, smiling that wide, polished smile he had perfected in boardrooms. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming across the hall, "we are here tonight to honor a man who has carried this company for decades." My chest swelled with emotion. Finally, I thought, they see me. They see the years, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. I nodded humbly as the room turned toward me. For just a second, I believed this was the recognition I had longed for, not in riches, not in power, but in respect. But then his smile tightened, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. 70 years of life, he continued, and a long, successful career. But there comes a time when even the strongest shoulders need rest. Tonight, we mark not only a birthday, but a retirement. The word hung in the air like a blade. Retirement? My heart stuttered. My eyes darted from one child to another, searching for a denial, a laugh, some reassurance that this was just part of a joke. But all I saw were nods, agreement, confirmation. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Retirement? I had never once spoken of stepping down. This company was my life's work, my legacy. Why would they speak of retirement now? My oldest daughter clinked her glass, smiling sweetly. "Father, you've done enough. It's time you let us carry the torch. Tonight is the beginning of a new chapter, for you and for us." The room erupted in polite applause. I stood frozen, my palms trembling. This wasn't a celebration. This was an ambush wrapped in balloons and champagne. And as my youngest son looked directly at me, eyes glinting with something cruel, I knew deep down this was no innocent mistake. This was planned. What I didn't yet realize was just how far they were willing to go to strip me of everything I had built. I forced a smile, trying to steady myself, but inside, my chest felt tight. My children surrounded me, offering toasts, their words laced with sweetness, but carrying a strange weight. "To Father," they said, raising their glasses. "To his rest. To the new generation." Every cheer sounded like a nail sealing a coffin I hadn't asked to lie in. I glanced at the banners strung across the room. At first, I had been too overwhelmed to notice the words printed in bold across the fabric. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't say "Happy 70th birthday, Dad." No, it read, "Celebrating a lifetime of service." Service, as if Had been a soldier dismissed from duty, as if my worth was only in what I had already given, not in what I still carried inside me. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I tried to laugh, to break the tension. "You've all gone through so much trouble," I said softly, my voice carrying more confusion than joy. "But I didn't know this was more than a birthday." That's when my middle son put a hand on my shoulder, the grip firm, almost patronizing. "Dad, it's time. We've already taken a vote. The board agrees. It's best for everyone if you step down now." The words hit harder than any blow I had ever felt. Taken a vote? Without me? I stared at him, then at the others. Each one avoided my eyes, their gazes slipping away like guilty children, though they were grown adults now, standing in judgment of the man who had raised them. My chest burned, and I tried to steady my breathing. "Step down?" I whispered. "This company, this family, was built by my hands. Every brick, every cent, every deal." But before I could finish, laughter rippled through the room, not cruel perhaps, but dismissive. Laughter meant to soften the blow, but instead it tore deeper. And then my youngest son leaned in close, his lips barely needing the microphone. His voice was clear, sharp, and merciless. "You're obsolete, old man." The room gasped. Some guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was part of a speech or a joke, but I knew he meant it. My knees nearly buckled, not from age, but from the weight of betrayal. I looked around the room one last time, realizing the truth. This wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. The word obsolete echoed in my ears, louder than the clinking glasses, louder than the forced applause. I wanted to believe I had misheard him, that perhaps he had chosen his words poorly. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw no mistake. I saw conviction. Cold, sharp conviction. He meant every syllable. The hall went uncomfortably quiet for a moment, then filled with murmurs and nervous laughter, as if the guests weren't sure whether to clap or recoil. I stood there, feeling stripped bare in front of everyone I knew. Business partners, distant relatives, old friends. People who had respected me for decades were now witnessing my own children mock me, as if I were nothing but a relic gathering dust. My oldest daughter stepped forward, holding a glass of champagne. "Father, don't take it the wrong way," she said sweetly, though her words sliced deeper than she knew. "This is a good thing. You can finally rest. Travel, enjoy yourself. We'll take it from here." Rest. That's all they thought I had left in me, as if 70 years of grit, struggle, and wisdom could be reduced to an old man sitting quietly in the corner, forgotten. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. You've decided this without me?" My words trembled as I searched their faces. Not one of them looked guilty. Not one looked ashamed. They had conspired together, my own blood, to push me out of the very empire I had built with my bare hands. My youngest son smirked, enjoying the moment. "Dad, the company needs fresh energy. The world has changed, and you're just not fit to lead anymore." He let the silence linger before adding, almost gleefully, "It's for your own good." The humiliation was unbearable. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers slithering through the crowd. I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, others judgmental, all of them watching the spectacle of a father being dethroned by his own children. I forced myself to stand tall, even as my heart cracked. I would not let them see me collapse. Not here, not now. I raised my chin, swallowed the bitterness in my throat, and nodded. "Very well," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "If this is what you believe is best." But inside, another voice spoke louder. "They think they've ended me. They have no idea what they've awakened." The clapping that followed my words was thin, almost mocking, and every sound pierced me like a blade. I stood in the center of the room, the man who had once commanded respect, now reduced to a frail shadow in the eyes of his own children. I searched for even a flicker of love in their faces, some silent plea to tell me this was all a mistake. But instead, I saw only confidence, relief, and in my youngest son's eyes, triumph. He leaned into the microphone again, grinning as if he had delivered the punchline of a cruel joke. "You've done enough, Father. Truly you have. But the world doesn't wait for men who can't keep up. Times are changing, and frankly, so must you." Then he smirked, and with venom in his tone, repeated the words that would never leave my memory. "You're obsolete, old man." The room went still. Some of the guests looked away, embarrassed to witness a son cut down his father so openly. Others nodded, as though they had expected this moment for years. I stood there, my fists trembling at my sides, my throat burning with words I could not speak. I wanted to shout, to remind them who I was, to remind them of the nights I came home covered in grease, hands blistered, while they slept peacefully under the roof I paid for, to remind them of the deals I closed, with nothing but grit and determination, the long hours I bled into building the company they now stood so proudly on. I wanted to scream that every dollar in their pockets had my sweat on it, but the words stuck in my throat, swallowed by the crushing weight of humiliation. My middle son raised his glass, breaking the silence. "Don't be upset, Dad. This is a celebration. We're just helping you step aside gracefully. Isn't that what family's for?" His tone was syrupy, but the arrogance behind it made my skin crawl. I nodded slowly, refusing to let them see the storm inside me. But deep down, a fire began to stir, hotter than the humiliation, sharper than the pain. I realized then that this wasn't just about age, or leadership, or change. This was about power, and my children had taken theirs at the cost of my dignity. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They thought this was the end of me. But what they didn't know was that I was far from finished. As their words echoed in my ears, my mind began to drift, almost against my will, back through the years. I remembered the nights when I came home so late my children were already asleep, and I left again before the sun rose. I remembered their mother waiting by the door with weary eyes, asking me if it was worth it, if I wasn't pushing myself too far. I always told her the same thing. It's for them. It's all for them. I remembered the hunger of my early years, the empty refrigerator, the bills piling higher than the money in my pocket. I swore my children would never feel that same fear, never go to bed with empty stomachs. So, I worked. I worked until my bones ached and my lungs burned, until every muscle in my body screamed for rest. I took risks when we had nothing, gambled on dreams when failure would have meant disaster, and when I won, I didn't keep it for myself. I poured it back into the company, back into the future, back into them. Vacations were missed. Birthdays were cut short. I even missed my eldest daughter's school play because I was locked in a negotiation that kept the company alive. She cried that night, and I promised her it would all make sense one day, when she was older, when she saw the life we had because of those sacrifices. And now here they were, my grown children, standing tall in fine suits and elegant dresses, all paid for by the sweat of my youth. And instead of gratitude, instead of respect, they gave me laughter. They gave me betrayal. The word obsolete rattled inside me, not just as an insult, but as a dismissal of my entire life. Obsolete meant my sacrifices meant nothing. Obsolete meant my blood and sweat were forgotten. Obsolete meant I was no longer useful to the very people I had nearly destroyed myself to protect. For a moment, my knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The humiliation was suffocating, the kind that makes a man question if he had wasted his entire life. But then another thought pierced through the pain, clear, sharp, and cold. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my worth, but they didn't know the truth. And in that moment, a vow formed inside me, silent but powerful. They will regret this. The applause faded into background noise as I quietly slipped away from the crowd. I didn't want to hear another toast, another word dressed as kindness, but dripping with betrayal. My feet carried me down the familiar corridors of the building, each step heavier than the last. These halls had been my second home for decades. I had walked them when they were nothing but bare concrete and flickering lights. I had overseen every renovation, every expansion, every wall painted, every floor polished. And now, for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own house. The portraits of our company's milestones lined the walls, grand openings, awards, celebrations of growth. My face was in almost every one of them, a younger version of me smiling with pride. I stopped in front of one picture where I stood beside my wife on the day we opened the very first office. Her smile was bright, her hand clutching mine with hope. I reached her hand, ached out and touched the glass, my reflection trembling against hers. Her voice echoed in my memory, soft but steady. "Don't let them destroy you." She had warned me once, years ago, that giving too much without teaching respect would come back to haunt me. I had brushed her words aside, telling her that love was enough, that one day the children would understand the sacrifices I made. I thought I was building more than wealth. I thought I was building loyalty. But standing there, alone in the dim hallway, I realized she had been right all along. Love without respect becomes entitlement. Sacrifice without recognition becomes invisible. And loyalty can vanish in a heartbeat when greed takes its place. I sank onto a bench near the entrance, the same one where I had once waited for clients to arrive. I buried my face in my hands, not caring if anyone saw. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my age pressing down on me, not because I was weak, but because I had been made to feel useless by those who should have held me highest. The party continued upstairs, laughter spilling down the hall like poison. They thought I was finished, broken, humiliated beyond repair. But as I sat there in the silence, a single thought rose above the noise of my pain. They may have pushed me down tonight, but they will never keep me there. That night I sat alone in my study, the house quieter than it had ever felt. The celebration had ended, but the echoes of their laughter followed me home like a curse. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, though it did little to steady the tremor in my hands. The room smelled of old leather and wood polish, the same room where I had once planned expansions, signed contracts, and dreamed of futures bright with possibility. Now it felt like a mausoleum of broken trust. I replayed the evening over and over in my mind, their smug faces, their rehearsed words, the cruel smirk of my youngest son as he spat out the word obsolete. Every detail burned deeper into me with each recollection. I had pictured this birthday so differently. I thought there would be laughter, yes, but laughter of joy, not derision. I thought there would be speeches, but speeches of gratitude, not dismissal. I thought I would see my children as a reflection of the love I had poured into them. Instead, I saw nothing but greed and entitlement staring back at me. I stared at the photographs on the shelves, family vacations, Christmas dinners, moments when their smiles were genuine, when their arms wrapped around me, not for show but for love. Where had that gone? At what point had money and power meant more to them than their own father? Was I blind, or had I simply refused to see what they were becoming? My wife's picture sat on my desk, her gentle eyes frozen in time. I picked it up and whispered, "You were right." I remembered the countless times she warned me, telling me that I was giving too much, shielding the children from every hardship, never letting them taste the struggle that had forged me. "They'll take you for granted," she said once, her voice heavy with worry, and now her prophecy stood fulfilled. But as I sat there drowning in humiliation, another thought crept into my mind, a sharper, colder thought that brought with it a strange kind of calm. They thought they had taken everything from me. They believed they had stripped me of power, reduced me to nothing but an old man with no fight left in him. What they didn't know was that I had kept something for myself, a secret I had never shared, not with the board, not even with them. They thought the empire was theirs now, but the foundation it stood on, that still belonged to me. And that was something they would soon learn the hard way. I leaned back in my chair, the glass of whiskey untouched on the desk, and let the truth settle in my mind. For years, everyone had believed the company was theirs. The board, my children, even the employees who whispered about the next generation taking control. But I had always been cautious. Life had taught me that the higher you build, the more dangerous it is to stand on shaky ground, and I made sure the ground beneath this empire was never out of my control. Decades ago, when the company was just beginning to grow, I bought the land where the headquarters now stood. I didn't put it in the company's name. I didn't share it with the board. I didn't even tell my children. I kept that deed locked away in my private safe, under my name alone. Everyone thought it belonged to the company, but it never did. The business may have grown into towers of glass and steel, but the soil it all rested on was mine. I had always told myself I was just being practical, protecting my family from outside threats, ensuring that if anything ever went wrong, we'd never lose everything. It was a shield, a safeguard, a father's foresight. But now, staring at the cruel smirk of my youngest son burned into my memory, I realized it was more than that. It was power, power they didn't even know existed. They could strip me of my title, force me into retirement, humiliate me in front of the world, but without the land, they had no empire. Their triumph was built on borrowed ground, and I held the key to it all. The thought calmed me, steadied me. For the first time that night, I felt my breath slow, the storm inside me giving way to something colder, sharper, resolve. They believed they had buried me, but I was not finished, not by a long shot. I placed my wife's picture back on the desk and whispered to her memory, "You'll see, they won't laugh for long." I rose from the chair, walked to the safe in the corner of my study, and spun the dial. Inside, under old letters and documents, lay the deed. I held it in my hands, the paper that would decide everything. They thought they owned the empire, but the ground beneath their feet was mine. And soon, they would feel it collapse. The deed felt heavier than paper should ever feel, as though it carried the weight of every sacrifice, every year of struggle, every drop of sweat I had poured into building what stood. Odd upon that ground, I slid it back into its envelope and locked it away, my mind sharper now than it had been in years. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, while my children were still basking in the glory of their so-called victory, I made my first move. I called my attorney, an old friend who had stood beside me through every storm. His voice on the phone was calm, steady, a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. "They pushed me out," I told him, my voice low, almost trembling with the weight of those words. "They humiliated me. They think I'm finished." He was silent for a long moment before asking, "Do you want to fight them?" I looked out the window at the rising sun. The light spilled over the towers of the company, gleaming proudly as if mocking me. "No," I said finally. "I don't want to fight them. I want to end them." Within hours, documents were drawn, contracts reviewed, options laid out. The lease my company had operated under all these years was ironclad, but it was also temporary. Renewal depended on me and only me. If I chose to terminate it, they would be forced out, stripped of their empire overnight. My lawyer laid it all out in neat clinical terms, but behind every word was a simple truth. I held the fate of their empire in my hands. I moved carefully, quietly. I didn't want them to suspect a thing. I kept my demeanor calm during family dinners, said little when they bragged about the new direction of the business. I even forced a smile when my youngest son mocked me again, this time in private, telling me to enjoy my retirement. He thought he had won, they all did. But every laugh, every smug look, every arrogant word only fueled the fire burning inside me. I wasn't rushing. No, revenge like this couldn't be sloppy. It had to be precise, clean, devastating. I was done being their puppet. I was done being their burden. I was done being their obsolete old man. They thought they had stolen my empire, but soon they would realize I had only been waiting for the right moment to take it all back and burn their pride with it. In the days that followed, I watched my children strut through life as if they had conquered the world. The office was theirs now, or so they believed. They moved into my old chair, sat at my old desk, and held meetings in the very boardroom where I had once guided them with patience and care. They wore their victory like a crown, parading it for anyone who would listen. My eldest daughter visited me one evening, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Father," she said, "I hope you're not taking it too hard. You deserve rest. We'll handle things now." She patted my hand as if I were some fragile relic, not the man who had built her future brick by brick. I smiled faintly, but inside my blood boiled. My middle son became louder, more arrogant. At family dinners, he talked about modernizing the business, mocking the old ways I had clung to. "Dad, you'd never understand," he said once, waving his fork dismissively. "This is a new era. You wouldn't keep up." The others laughed, not cruelly perhaps, but with a confidence that stung deeper than any insult. And then, of course, there was my youngest, the one who had dared to call me obsolete. He relished every chance to remind me of his triumph. He would lean back in his chair, smirk on his face, and say things like, "How's retirement treating you, Dad? Boring yet?" His words were daggers, but I let them sink in without reaction. Outwardly, I stayed calm, my face unreadable. Inwardly, I carved every word into memory, each insult becoming another brick in the wall of my resolve. They thought I was silent because I was defeated. They mistook my quiet for weakness, but the truth was far simpler. I was waiting. Every smirk they gave me, every arrogant laugh, every dismissive comment only fed the fire inside me. They thought I was too old to fight back, too tired to stand up. But I had already begun moving pieces they couldn't even see. While they boasted of their new reign, I had already written its end. I let them celebrate, let them mock, let them believe they had won, because nothing would make my revenge sweeter than watching the shock bloom on their faces when they realized their empire wasn't theirs at all. They were kings and queens, sitting on a throne of sand, and soon the tide would come. Of all my children, it was my youngest son who cut the deepest. The word obsolete hadn't just been an insult from a business rival. It was a blade driven into my heart by the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, the child I thought would always stay closest to me. I remembered the nights when he was little, clinging to my shirt as I came home late from the factory. He would sit on my lap while I pored over invoices, his tiny fingers tracing the lines of numbers he couldn't yet understand. "One day, Dad," he used to say, "I'll be just like you. I'll run this place with you." Those words had been my comfort through the endless grind. I believed them with all my heart. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, his legs trembling with fear until I steadied him. "Don't let go," he had cried, and I promised I never would. That promise echoed in my ears now, mocking me. Somewhere along the way, he had let go first, not only of my hand, but of the values I had tried to teach him: respect, gratitude, humility. Even as he grew older, I forgave his arrogance, telling myself it was just youthful pride. When he botched his first deal and cost the company thousands, I protected him, quietly covering the loss. When he stormed out of meetings because he couldn't handle criticism, I soothed the board, reminding them he just needed time. I gave him chances again and again, believing that one day he would mature, that one day he would honor the sacrifices I made for him. And yet, it was he who stood in front of everyone, smirking as he cut me down, as if I were nothing more than a burden to be discarded. The boy who once begged me not to let go was now the man who had shoved me aside. That betrayal burned more than any other. My other children's silence was painful, yes, but his cruelty was unbearable. He hadn't just voted me out of the company, he had exiled me from his heart. I sat alone, replaying his words over and over, each repetition fueling something darker inside me. If it had been anyone else, perhaps I could have forgiven, but my youngest son, the one I had carried, protected, and believed in, had made me his enemy, and for that, I would make him remember who gave him everything he had. Days passed, but his words never left me. Obsolete. They echoed in my ears when I woke in the morning, when I tried to sleep at night, when I sat at the dinner table alone with my thoughts. My other children still played their roles, polite smiles, hollow reassurances, empty gestures of concern, but he didn't bother to hide his contempt. No, my youngest son reveled in it. One night, long after the house had gone quiet, my phone buzzed with a message. I almost ignored it, but something in me compelled me to look. It was from him. Only a single line, but it carried the venom of 100 insults. "Stay out of business, old man, you're finished." I read the words again and again, each time my chest tightening as though he had struck me with his fists. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from rage. He had humiliated me in front of the world, stripped me of my dignity in my own company, and now, in the quiet of night, he dared to drive the knife deeper. I stared at the glow of the screen, my reflection in the glass twisted with fury. A father should never hate his son, I thought, but in that moment I felt something dangerously close. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was war. I set the phone down carefully, deliberately, as if it were evidence of a crime. My pulse slowed, my mind sharpening. That message was the final push I needed. There was no forgiveness waiting at the end of this road, no reconciliation, no gentle lesson in humility. He had chosen to treat me not as a father, not even as a man, but as an obstacle to be discarded. And obstacles, once removed, clear the path. But what he didn't understand was that I wasn't finished. I wasn't done. I wasn't obsolete. I was the foundation of everything he thought belonged to him. Without me, there was no empire. Without me, there was nothing. I poured myself another drink, but this time it wasn't to numb the pain. It was a toast, silent and cold, to the inevitable. He thought he had broken me. In truth, he had forged me into something far stronger, far colder than I had ever been. That night, I made my decision, and once I chose my path, there was no turning back. The next morning, I woke with a strange calmness in my chest. The bitterness of humiliation had burned away, leaving only a clear, icy focus. My youngest son's message still sat on my phone, glowing like a scar across the screen, but I didn't need to read it again. I knew what I had to do. I called my lawyer at dawn. His voice was groggy, but when he heard the steadiness in mine, he understood. "It's time," I said simply. No need for long explanations. He knew exactly what I meant. Within the hour, I was sitting across from him in his office, the papers laid out between us like weapons on a battlefield. The lease. That single, unassuming document held the key to everything. For years, my company, their company now, as they believed, had operated under the safety of that agreement. But it was my name that bound it, my signature that gave them the right to build their empire on my land. Without it, they had nothing but glass walls standing on borrowed soil. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't the humiliated old man they thought I was. I was the man who had clawed his way out of poverty, the man who had built an empire from nothing, the man they had underestimated. The ink flowed smoothly as I signed the termination notice. "There's no going back after this," my lawyer warned, sliding the papers into a folder. "There's nothing to go back to," I replied. "They ended that the night they betrayed me." By noon, the documents were on their way to their offices. The countdown had begun. Soon, my children would discover that their victory was nothing but smoke. They had laughed in my face, stripped me of my dignity, paraded me as obsolete, but by the time the truth reached them, it would already be too late. I imagined their faces, the confusion, the disbelief, the panic, as they realized the ground beneath them was slipping away. I almost pitied them, but then I remembered my son's smirk, his cruel words echoing through the hall. "You're obsolete, old man." No, pity was not for them. This was justice. I left the lawyer's office with my shoulders straight, my steps firm. For the first time in weeks I felt alive. They thought they had buried me, but I was already preparing to bury their empire. By nightfall, the first cracks in their kingdom would appear, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The following day, I arranged a meeting in quiet secrecy, not with my children, not with the board, but with a man they had always dismissed, a rival they had mocked for years, someone they thought was beneath them. He arrived at my study with a firm handshake and eyes that burned with ambition. For years, he had watched from the sidelines as my family empire grew untouchable, and for years he had waited for a chance. Now, I was handing him the opportunity of a lifetime. We sat across from each other, and I slid the folder across the desk. Inside were the documents that would shift everything: the termination notice, the land deeds, the proof of my ownership. His eyes widened as he skimmed the papers. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. "They don't know about this, do they?" he asked, barely able to contain the thrill in his voice. "They don't," I replied. "They believe the ground belongs to them, but it never did. And now it's yours, if you want it." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling a laugh that was part disbelief, part triumph. "You're offering me their empire." "No," I said firmly. "I'm selling you the land. What you build on it is your choice. But understand this. Once you take it, their empire collapses overnight. Their pride, their arrogance, their so-called future will crumble into dust." The deal was struck with efficiency that mirrored my resolve. My lawyer finalized the terms. Signatures were exchanged, and by the end of the day, the rival competitor was the rightful holder of what my children thought was theirs. It wasn't just business. It was justice, written in ink and sealed by the law. I felt no regret, no hesitation. They had cast me aside, humiliated me, called me obsolete. But now they would learn that the foundation of their world had always been mine to command. As the rival left my study, his parting words lingered. "By tomorrow, they'll have nothing." I stood by the window, watching the evening sky darken. My children, somewhere across the city, were likely raising glasses to their victory, laughing, celebrating their new era. They had no idea that as the sun set, so too did their empire. Tomorrow, the world they thought was theirs would belong to someone else. It didn't take long for the storm to reach them. By midday, the phones at their offices rang off the hook, lawyers scrambling, board members demanding answers, employees whispering in the hallways. Word spread like wildfire. The lease was terminated, the land had been sold, and the foundation of their empire no longer belonged to them. Everything they thought they controlled had been ripped out from under their feet. I sat in my living room, calm, steady, the quiet hum of the grandfather clock marking each passing second. Then I heard it, the slam of car doors outside, the hurried footsteps up my walkway. A moment later, the front door burst open without a knock, and there they were, my children, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad!" my eldest daughter cried, her voice cracking. "What have you done?" They swarmed into the room like cornered animals, their arrogance stripped away, replaced with desperation. My middle son threw a folder onto the coffee table, the papers spilling across it. "The lease! Terminated! The land! Sold! Tell me this isn't true!" I looked down at the papers calmly, then back up at their frantic faces. "It's true." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Their chests heaved, their hands trembled. My youngest son, the one who had called me obsolete, stepped forward, his smirk gone, his bravado shattered. His voice was small, almost pleading. You wouldn't do this to us, to your own family. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands together. Family, I repeated slowly, tasting the word on my tongue. Was that what you called it when you stood in front of me, laughed in my face, and told me I was finished? Was that family when you stripped me of dignity in the company I built? None of them spoke. Their silence was the loudest confession of all. You wanted me gone, I continued, my voice steady, sharp as a blade. And now you see what life without me truly looks like. Tears welled in my daughter's eyes. My middle son raked his fingers through his hair, muttering curses under his breath. And my youngest, the one who had dealt the cruelest blow, could only stand there, trembling, realizing the empire he thought he owned had vanished overnight. They had believed I was powerless. Now they stood before me with nothing, begging for the mercy they had never shown. I let the silence stretch, savoring the way their confidence collapsed into dust. For the first time in years, they weren't towering over me with arrogance or smug certainty. They were small, fragile, exposed, and I wanted them to feel every ounce of the pain they had poured into me. You called me obsolete, I said finally, my voice calm, almost too calm. My gaze fell on my youngest son, whose eyes flickered with shame. You laughed as you threw me out of my own company, the empire I bled for. You told me I was finished. Well, here I stand. And where is your empire now? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lips trembled, his jaw clenched, and still he said nothing. I turned to the others. You all stood there. Not one of you defended me. Not one of you remembered the nights I worked while you slept, the meals I skipped so you could eat, the sacrifices your mother and I made so you would never taste the poverty I knew as a boy. You forgot all of it. You forgot me. My eldest daughter wiped at her tears, her voice breaking. We only wanted to protect the company. We thought. You thought wrong, I cut her off, my tone sharp enough to make her flinch. You thought you could cut me down and rise taller in my place, but you built your pride on my foundation, and without me, you had nothing. You see that now? The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with the weight of truth they could no longer deny. I don't hate you, I said, though my words carried no warmth, but I will not be your victim. You wanted to see me powerless. Instead, you've learned just how much power I truly held. My middle son stepped forward, his voice breaking into desperation. Please, Dad, give us another chance. Don't let it end like this. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. You ended it the moment you chose betrayal over respect. Actions have consequences, and this is yours. Their heads bowed, their shoulders slumped. The mighty heirs to my empire now stood like children who had been scolded, stripped of everything they believed was theirs. I rose slowly from my chair, my voice quiet but final. You wanted me gone. Now you are the ones left with nothing. As they stood before me, broken and silent, my eyes drifted to the mantel above the fireplace. There sat a photograph of their mother, my wife, smiling gently, her arms wrapped around the children when they were small. For a moment, the room faded, and I heard her voice again, soft yet steady, like she was standing right beside me. Be careful, she used to say, if you give them everything. Long without teaching them what it costs, they will never learn to value it. They'll mistake love for weakness. Back then, I dismissed her worries. I told her that children raised in comfort would grow into gratitude, that one day they would understand the sacrifices we had made. I believed love alone would guide them, that if I shielded them from hunger and hardship, they would rise above greed. But she saw what I refused to see. She saw how easily abundance could breed entitlement. Now, standing in my home with my grown children staring at me in desperation, I realized she had been right all along. I had given them everything, but I had not taught them to respect what they were given. I carried the burden alone, thinking I was protecting them. But all I had done was build them a kingdom they believed they deserved simply by birthright. I remembered the nights when she begged me to spend more time with them, to let them see not just the results of my labor, but the struggle behind it. I told her I didn't have time, that I was doing it all for them. Now I could hear her sigh in the back of my mind, a mixture of love and sorrow. If she were here, I wondered, would she have softened them? Would her wisdom have tempered their pride? Or would they still have chosen betrayal, drunk on ambition and blinded by arrogance? I looked at their faces again, each one carrying her features in some way, her eyes, her smile, her hair. That made the pain sharper. Her love lived in them, but her wisdom had been buried under greed. I whispered under my breath, almost to her memory, "You were right, my love. You saw it coming. And now they must face the lesson we never taught them." And as my children lowered their eyes, I realized that this was not just my revenge. In a way, it was hers too. In the weeks that followed, the empire they had once boasted about unraveled before their very eyes. The rival competitor wasted no time. He moved in swiftly, taking control of the property, rebranding, and sweeping up clients who had once sworn loyalty to my family's name. The gleaming glass tower that had been their pride now bore another man's insignia, a constant reminder of what they had lost. I heard whispers from the business community. People spoke of how quickly my children had fallen, how unprepared they had been to face real adversity. Investors pulled out, deals collapsed, and one by one, the board members who had supported them began to scatter. The mighty heirs, once so certain of their brilliance, were left scrambling in a world that no longer bowed to their name. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. Every stumble, every failure, every closed door was a consequence of their arrogance. They had believed the company was indestructible simply because they were in charge. But without the foundation I had laid, without the foresight and grit I had carried for decades, they were exposed as children playing dress-up in suits too big for them. I would see them sometimes passing through town. Their shoulders weren't as straight anymore, their smiles weren't as wide. The youngest, who had once looked me in the eye with mockery, now avoided my gaze altogether. I could see the shame weighing on him, though he still carried the pride of youth that refused to admit defeat. My daughter, who had spoken of me needing rest, looked at me now with eyes that seemed to beg silently for forgiveness she could not ask for out loud. And the competitor, he thrived. His company grew stronger each day, fueled by the collapse of mine. I had handed him the opportunity, yes, but it was my children who had laid the path with their betrayal. They had underestimated me, underestimated the fragility of their own power, and in doing so, they handed their enemy the very throne they had stolen from me. I wasn't proud of their suffering, but neither did I pity them. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was consequence. They needed to learn that empires aren't inherited, they are built. And without respect for the hands that built them, even the grandest towers can fall overnight, and fall they did. It was late one evening when my youngest son finally came to me. I heard the hesitant knock on the door, softer than I had ever heard from him before. When I opened it, he stood there in the dim light, shoulders slumped, his confidence gone. For the first time since he was a boy, he looked small to me. Small and afraid. "Dad," he said quietly, almost choking on the word, "can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting him in. He didn't stride into the room like he used to, chest puffed with pride. No, he walked slowly, as though the weight of his failure pressed down on him with every step. He sat across from me, his eyes darting away, unable to meet mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy, filled with all the words unsaid between us. Finally he broke it, his voice trembling. I was wrong." He swallowed hard. "About everything." I studied him carefully. This was the same son who had called me obsolete in front of a room full of people, who had thrown me out of my own company with laughter in his eyes. And now, here he was, stripped of his arrogance, speaking not as a conqueror, but as a boy who had lost his way. "You betrayed me," I said evenly. My tone wasn't angry, but it cut through him all the same. "You mocked me. You forgot everything I did to put food on this table, to build a life for you. You didn't just disrespect me. You tried to erase me." Tears welled in his eyes, and he nodded. "I know, and I can't take it back. I thought I was strong enough. I thought I didn't need you. But without you, without what you built, I'm nothing." His voice cracked on the last word, and he lowered his head. For a moment I felt the ache of a father's love tug at my heart, but I held it back. He needed to feel this weight. He needed to understand. "I don't want your apology," I said firmly. "What I want is for you to remember this pain. Remember it. Every time you think of cutting down the very person who gave you everything, respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And you, my son, have much to earn back." He nodded silently, tears slipping down his cheeks. For the first time, I saw not arrogance in his eyes, but regret, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginnings of humility. As I sat there watching my son with his head bowed, I felt the years pressing on me, not as a weight, but as a reminder. Life had shown me battles in business, hardship in poverty, and loss in love, but nothing ever cut as deep as betrayal from family. Strangers can hurt you, rivals can scheme against you, but when the wound comes from your own blood, it bleeds differently. It stains the soul. And that's what I want you to understand. Family is supposed to be a shelter, a place where respect and love are not optional, but sacred. Yet too often, greed, pride, and entitlement turn that shelter into a battlefield. My children thought they could erase me, discard me, humiliate me, and still keep everything I had given them. They thought respect wasn't necessary, that blood alone gave them the right to rule. But respect is not inherited, gratitude cannot be forced, and when those things are forgotten, the very foundation of family begins to crumble. I didn't take revenge out of malice. I did what I did because they needed to learn that actions have consequences. That arrogance without wisdom leads only to ruin, that you cannot spit on the hands that built your empire and expect them to keep holding you up. Some of you listening may know that pain. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone you loved more than yourself. Maybe you've been pushed aside after years of sacrifice, made to feel small, unwanted, or obsolete. If you've ever carried that wound, then you know how deep it burns. But hear me, the fire of betrayal can also forge strength. It can remind you that dignity is not something anyone can take from you unless you let them. Sometimes the only way to teach those who betray you is through the weight of their own consequences. My children learned that lesson the hardest way possible, and I hope, wherever you are, you never have to. But if you do, remember this: respect is not a gift, it is earned, and when it is lost, the cost is heavier than they will ever be ready to pay. As the house grew quiet again, and my son's footsteps faded into the night, I sat alone with my thoughts. The empire I had built was no longer mine, and yet, in truth, it had never been theirs either. It was built on my vision, my sacrifice, my relentless will, and when they chose betrayal, they severed themselves from the very root that fed them. I thought of my life as a whole, 70 years carved out of struggle and triumph. I remembered the hunger that once gnawed at me as a boy, the nights I went without sleep to keep the lights on, the endless sacrifices that no one ever saw. And I remembered the love that guided me through it all, the love of a wife who believed in me, and the hope that my children would one day carry that same torch with respect. They didn't. They tried to snuff it out, laughing as they pushed me aside, convinced that my time had ended. But they forgot something simple, something so obvious, it astonishes me even now. I wasn't just part of the company. I was the foundation. And when the foundation moves, the empire falls. That is the truth they learned, not from my lectures, not from my guidance, but from the cold, hard reality of consequence. They had mocked me, humiliated me, and called me obsolete. And yet, when I stepped aside, the walls came crashing down around them. Not because I wished it, but because that's what happens when you try to build a future on arrogance instead of gratitude. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Perhaps they will rise again. Perhaps they will find humility in their failures. Perhaps they will learn, finally, the value of respect and the cost of betrayal. But whatever happens, they will never forget this lesson. They will never forget the day they laughed at me and lost everything the very next morning. And to you, listening to my story, I will leave you with this. If you've been betrayed, if you've been cast aside by those you love, know that you are not powerless. You are not obsolete. Your worth does not vanish because someone fails to see it. Sometimes silence and patience are the sharpest weapons. They thought they ended me, but I was only waiting, and when I moved, their empire crumbled.